The quiet suburban street had always been a picture of conformity, with perfectly manicured lawns, matching mailboxes, and neighbors who smiled politely while silently judging. For years, the Homeowners Association had maintained an unspoken rule. Appearances mattered above all else, and deviations, no matter how minor, were swiftly addressed. For the Thompson family, this neighborhood had been a dream come true, a safe haven where their two young children could play freely in the backyard under the watchful eye of their parents. When they installed a small, colorful slide for their kids, it seemed harmless, a simple addition to a family-friendly home. The slide, a bright sunny yellow, had been chosen with laughter in mind, a way to make the backyard a place of joy. But in this seemingly idyllic community, joy had a cost. Within a week, a sharply worded letter arrived from the HOA to reside as excessively bright in a violation of community aesthetic standards. The letter, signed by the HOA president and a board of meticulously groomed neighbors, threatened escalating fines if the slide was not removed immediately. Confusion gave way to frustration as the Thompsons. How could a simple yellow plastic slide designed for the innocent pleasure of children be considered a threat to the neighborhood? Yet the HOA rules were clear, or at least their interpretation of them was, and in this neighborhood, interpretation often meant tyranny. The Thompsons attempted to reason, submitting polite requests for reconsideration, hoping the board might see the matter from a parent's perspective. Their appeals were met with cold, impersonal replies, citing obscure clauses about a color uniformity and a visual consistency. As the fines mounted, so did the tension, casting a shadow over a household that had once been filled with carefree laughter. The children, oblivious to the bureaucracy encroaching on their fun, continued to play, sliding down their little yellow ramp with squeals of delight. Every turn on the slide became a subtle act of defiance, a quiet resistance against the rigidity of an overbearing HOA. The neighborhood, outwardly serene, began to feel stifling. Gossip spread like wildfire as neighbors whispered about the Thompsons' so-called violation. Some nodded in sympathy, others smirked at what they perceived as a petty rebellion, but the board's grip remained unyielding. It wasn't long before the situation escalated. Karen, a notoriously vocal and self-appointed enforcer of HOA rules, became personally involved. She appeared in the neighborhood with a clipboard, eyeing the bright slide with exaggerated horror, taking notes as if documenting a crime scene. Her expressions were theatrically scandalized, and she reportedly muttered about the dangers posed to a community's standards and of property values. The absurdity of it all began to gnaw at the Thompsons. The fines, now accumulating daily, seemed almost designed to provoke a reaction, to force them into submission. And yet, a spark of resolve had been ignited. The family realized that simply complying would mean surrendering their right to enjoy their own backyard, and, perhaps more importantly, allowing an arbitrary authority to dictate the terms of their happiness. That night, as the children slept, the parents sat together in quiet contemplation, planning a strategy that went beyond polite letters and measured appeals. They considered every possible avenue: legal action, community petitions, private mediation, but nothing seemed fast or dramatic enough to counteract the absurdity of the situation. And then a bold idea took shape. If the HOA was going to play by rules designed for spectacle and enforcement, maybe it was time to turn the spotlight back on them. If the slide was too bright for the neighborhood, then the story deserved witnesses. They would invite the local news to come to see firsthand the lengths to which the HOA was willing to go to watch a family fight for simple joy in a world obsessed with appearances. The decision was not made lightly. They knew that stepping into the public eye would amplify every critique, every flaw, every ridiculous regulation that had been imposed without reason. Yet the thought of standing silently by while their children's happiness was penalized felt unbearable. The following morning, as sunlight spilled across the suburban streets, the Thompsons began drafting their press release, detailing the absurd fines and the HOA obsessive scrutiny of a harmless backyard slide. They reached out to local reporters, highlighting the human side of the story: the laughter of children, the mounting stress on a family, and the overreach of an organization that had lost sight of its original purpose. Each email sent was a declaration, a signal that they would not be bullied by someone else's narrow view of order and conformity. Word began to circulate, whispers reaching the ears of neighbors who had previously observed the saga with passive curiosity. Some offered support, others skepticism, but the momentum was growing. By the end of the week, the Thompsons had secured tentative interest from a small local news station, enough to ensure that their story and the HOA increasingly absurd behavior would soon be visible to the entire community. The children, still blissfully unaware of the bureaucratic storm swirling around them, played on the slide as usual, each giggle echoing like a subtle rebellion. And somewhere between the mounting fines, the incredulous neighbors, and the looming news cameras, the Thompsons felt a quiet sense of vindication. They were no longer simply homeowners. They were participants in a story that exposed the absurdity of micromanaged suburban life. A story that would shine a bright, unapologetic light on an organization that had forgotten its own humanity. As the preparations for the media presence continued, tension and anticipation hung over the neighborhood like a thick fog, signaling the beginning of a confrontation that no one could ignore. The stage was being set, not just for a fight over a slide, but for a reckoning that would reveal the true character of the HOA to everyone watching. And with that, the chapter of quiet frustration ended, leaving the Thompsons poised for the next phase of their calculated defiance, determined to take their stand in the glare of public scrutiny. The morning of the scheduled news visit arrived with an eerie mix of tension and excitement, as if the suburban street itself held its breath. Early light glinted off the perfectly aligned rooftops, the calm veneer of normalcy masking the storm about to unfold. By mid-morning, the news crew pulled up, cameras and microphones in tow, their presence immediately drawing the attention of neighbors who had long observed the Thompsons' ordeal with curiosity and judgment. A small crowd had already gathered, a mix of sympathizers and nosy onlookers, their faces reflecting a spectrum of skepticism, amusement, and anticipation. Karen, ever the vigilant enforcer of aesthetic conformity, appeared at her usual perch across the street, clipboard in hand, eyes narrowing as she assessed the scene. The bright yellow slide, now framed by the cluster of cameras and reporters, seemed to defy her authority more than ever, each curve of the plastic a subtle act of rebellion. The homeowners, clad in casual clothing yet tense with determination, guided the children toward the slide, ensuring that the footage captured the essence of innocence under siege. As the cameras rolled, the reporters began narrating the story to their audience, detailing the fines, the letters, and the increasingly absurd rationale cited by the AAO. Phrases like overly bright and it violates neighborhood standards echoed in the air, almost surreal in their triviality, drawing murmurs from the crowd that swelled with interest. Neighbors whispered among themselves, some expressing admiration for the family's courage, others shaking their heads at the drama now unfolding in front of their doorsteps. Karen moved with calculated indignation, gesturing toward the slide as though she could physically erase its color from existence. Her every move, recorded on camera, seemed to amplify the ridiculousness of her crusade, turning what she viewed as enforcement into a spectacle for everyone watching. The children continued to play, their laughter a stark contrast to the tension radiating from the adults, each squeal punctuating the unfolding narrative of suburban absurdity. As interviews with the Thompsons commenced, the parents recounted the escalating fines, the relentless letters, and the sheer arbitrariness of the rules being enforced. The news crew captured every detail, the mounting paperwork, the nervous glances at the approaching HOA president, and the children's unrestrained joy on the slide. The story was no longer just about a backyard fixture. It had evolved into a tangible symbol of resistance against micromanagement, a microcosm of the clash between personal freedom and bureaucratic control. Karen, sensing the rising scrutiny, shifted her approach, attempting to frame herself as a protector of property values and community integrity. Her voice, measured and sharp, carried across the lawn as she outlined her vision of neighborhood standards, unaware that her arguments were being broadcast to a potentially vast audience. The camera lingered on her expressions, exaggerated frowns, pursed lips, and a steely gaze that seemed almost comical in its intensity. Meanwhile, neighbors who had once whispered behind closed doors now openly watched, some nodding in agreement with the Thompsons, others astonished by the audacity of an EJ, inchoate something as innocuous as a children's slide. The reporter, skilled at drawing out the human drama, highlighted the contrast between the joyful innocence of the kids and the meticulous, almost obsessive scrutiny imposed by Karen and the HOA's board. Footage of the slide gleaming under the sunlight, children sliding down with uninhibited delight, juxtaposed with close-ups of paperwork and stern expressions, painted a striking visual of disproportionate enforcement. Social media notifications began to buzz as the news segment teased the story online, hashtags proliferating with phrases like #HOA gone wild and #backyard battles, turning what had been a local dispute into a narrative with viral potential. Karen, increasingly aware that her actions were being scrutinized beyond the immediate street, doubled down, issuing proclamations about safety and community standards, yet each word seemed only to magnify the absurdity in the eyes of viewers. The Thompsons, maintaining their composure, continued their quiet defiance, guiding the children on the slide and explaining to reporters that this wasn't merely about plastic and color, it was about fairness, reason, and the right of families to enjoy their own property without fear of arbitrary punishment. The cameras captured everything: the escalating tension, the minor chaos, the backdrop of pristine lawns, and the subtle comedy of an overzealous HOA figure taking on the innocent pleasures of childhood. By midday, the story had gathered momentum, the neighborhood abuzz with the spectacle, and Karen's attempts to assert authority increasingly undermined by the unflinching gaze of the media. The once quiet cul-de-sac had become a stage, the slide at its center a beacon of light in both color and principle, highlighting the disproportionate zeal of the HOA. The news crew wrapped up interviews with final shots of the family smiling, children waving at the cameras and Karen standing rigidly, clipboard clutched, as though defiance alone could restore her sense of control. As the cameras departed, the neighborhood lingered in a charged silence, neighbors exchanging looks that blended disbelief and newfound respect for the Thompsons' courage. The parents knew that while the immediate confrontation had concluded, the story was far from over. The segment would air, reactions would pour in, and the HOA reputation would be laid bare before a far wider audience than they had ever anticipated. And as the children continued to play, unconcerned with the drama surrounding them, the Thompsons felt a quiet sense of triumph, aware that their stand against petty tyranny had reached a public stage, setting the tone for the battles yet to come. The fallout from the media coverage hit the neighborhood like a thunderclap, leaving every resident acutely aware that the small yellow slide had become a symbol of rebellion and scrutiny far larger than anyone had anticipated. The OA board, previously confident in its authority, now found itself under an unrelenting microscope. Internal emails leaked to a few curious neighbors revealed frantic discussions among board members, each message dripping with frustration and disbelief. They debated the optics of the situation, the risk of public backlash, and the potential damage to their carefully curated reputations. Karen, whose fervor had fueled much of the board's enforcement, was particularly incensed. She viewed the news coverage as a personal affront, a public embarrassment that undermined her years of policing every mailbox, lawn ornament, and garden gnome. Her anger was palpable, manifesting in long, tightly worded emails, each more scathing than the last, condemning the Thompsons for escalating minor issues into public spectacles and threatening further fines as a form of reasserting control. But the community's reaction was unpredictable. Conversations once whispered over backyard fences were now open debates at neighborhood coffee gatherings, online forums, and social media groups. Residents shared links to the news coverage, pausing over each image of the bright yellow slide juxtaposed with Karen's stern expressions and commenting on the absurdity of fines levied for something so innocuous. Some expressed shock at the HOA's strict enforcement. Others applauded the Thompsons for taking a stand, seeing in their actions a rare example of ordinary people resisting petty authority. The parents themselves were inundated with messages of support from neighbors they had never interacted with before, many recounting their own encounters with the HOA, some far more ridiculous than the situation with the slide. It became evident that this story had struck a nerve, exposing the latent frustrations of residents long resigned to silent compliance. Amid the growing public attention, the board convened an emergency meeting, the atmosphere thick with tension and defensive. Karen dominated the session, her voice sharp, pointing at projections of the media coverage and arguing that the board's credibility had been irrevocably damaged. The Thompsons' decision to involve the news, she claimed, was a deliberate act of defiance that could not go unanswered. Her colleagues, some quietly sympathetic to the family, tried to temper her fervor, emphasizing caution and the potential legal ramifications of escalating fines in the wake of public exposure. But Karen was unyielding, insisting that the slide represented a broader threat to the neighborhood's order and aesthetics, framing her argument as though the very fabric of community life depended on its removal. Meanwhile, the Thompsons, aware that the HOA would not relinquish control quietly, began documenting everything meticulously. Each communication, every fine, every interaction was archived, creating a detailed record of what they perceived as harassment. They anticipated that any further attempts at enforcement could escalate into a legal challenge, and they wanted evidence to ensure that the public and potentially the courts understood the disproportionate nature of the HOA. The children, blissfully unaware of the heightened tensions, continued to play on the slide, their laughter serving as both solace and subtle defiance. Each squeal of delight underscored the irrationality of the fines and reminded the adults of the original reason for the slide's existence: joy, not rebellion. As the days passed, the neighborhood became a stage of contrasts. On one side were the board members, particularly Karen, visibly flustered and increasingly defensive. On the other were the Thompsons, their calm persistence amplified by public visibility and the support of neighbors who had grown sympathetic. Online, discussions about the story continued to proliferate, with hashtags and local forums buzzing with commentary. Some posts mocked the HOA obsession with color schemes and minor infractions, while others highlighted the courage of the family standing up to a bureaucratic force long assumed untouchable. Even outside the immediate neighborhood, the story began to gain traction, attracting the attention of community bloggers and social commentators who framed it as an example of suburban overreach and the absurdity of micromanaged homeowner associations. The board's attempts to counter the narrative only fueled further criticism. Statements about protecting property values and ensuring visual harmony were interpreted as petty and disproportionate. And the more Karen insisted on the necessity of strict enforcement, the more the public laughed at the spectacle. The Thompsons remained strategic, refusing to engage in direct confrontation with Karen, instead allowing the story to unfold organically through media coverage and public perception. The news segment aired that evening, featuring footage of the children playing, interviews with the parents, and images of Karen standing rigidly beside her clipboard. Reactions poured in instantly. Social media engagement surged, neighbors called to express support, and local blogs began covering the unfolding drama, each new story adding momentum to the narrative. The HOA, previously operating in a closed loop of authority, was now confronted with the reality that its actions were subject to external scrutiny. The board, desperate to regain control, debated issuing an official statement defending its decisions, but each draft seemed increasingly tone-deaf, failing to address the public's perception that the fines were absurd and the enforcement overzealous. In the background, tension simmered between the Thompsons and Karen, whose personal sense of authority had been publicly challenged. Karen became more visible around the neighborhood, ostensibly checking other properties and enforcing rules, but it was clear that her focus remained on the family and their infamous slide. Her presence created a subtle but constant pressure, a reminder that the conflict had only just begun. The parents, however, refused to be intimidated. They continued their careful documentation, engaged with reporters when necessary, and ensured that their interactions with the HOA were measured and deliberate. Each decision reinforced their position as reasonable actors standing up to an unreasonable authority. Meanwhile, neighbors' attitudes shifted noticeably. Those who had once quietly tolerated the HOA overreach now began questioning other fines and regulations inspired by the Thompsons' courage. Conversations that had previously centered on who maintained the best lawn now touched on the fairness of HOA rules and the balance between community standards and personal freedom. It became apparent that the story had transcended a single yellow slide. It was now emblematic of a broader struggle between micromanaged control and individual rights within suburban communities. As the week drew on, tension and anticipation reached a peak. The HOA board, fearing further media exposure, debated legal threats, sending carefully worded notices designed to intimidate while avoiding direct confrontation. Karen, however, remained relentless, her determination fueled as much by personal pride as by adherence to the rules. The Thompsons anticipated each move, preparing responses, gathering statements from supportive neighbors, and ensuring that their position remained firmly in the public eye. The small yellow slide, once a simple playground fixture, had become a symbol of resistance, a rallying point for a community beginning to question the authority that had long governed it unquestioned. And as the children slid down, squealing with uncontainable joy, it became clear that the family's persistence, strategic use of media, and calm defiance had shifted the balance. The HOA, powerful in theory, now found itself vulnerable under the lens of public scrutiny, and Karen's zeal, once feared, had become a spectacle of overreach. The stage was set for an inevitable confrontation, one that would test the limits of authority, the power of public opinion, and the resilience of a family defending not just a backyard slide, but the right to live without arbitrary punishment. And with the neighborhood now fully invested, with cameras, hashtags, and neighbors watching closely, the story was far from over, promising new twists, escalating tension, and moments of both humor and outrage that would define the next chapter of this suburban saga. The following week brought a new wave of tension to the normally serene suburban streets, as the HOA, visibly rattled by the growing media attention, decided to escalate its efforts. Overnight, the Thompsons received a thick envelope stamped with the official HOA seal, its contents spelling out an astonishing list of additional fines. Each fine was meticulously itemized, citing not only the yellow slide but other violations that had previously gone unnoticed. Flower beds deemed too colorful, garden ornaments not perfectly aligned, and even a minor deviation in lawn height. The language was formal and cold, an attempt to assert authority while conveying the seriousness of the board's intent. But beneath the rigid words lay desperation. The HOA had realized that its prior tactics had failed to intimidate and that public perception had turned sharply against them. Karen, once the unchallenged enforcer of every rule, now found herself in a reactive role. She circulated emails to other board members, urging immediate action and advocating for legal intervention. Her tone was urgent, almost panicked, as she warned that the Thompsons' defiance, if left unchecked, could embolden other residents to challenge fines and rules, eroding the board's carefully maintained authority. The parents, however, met this new wave of hostility with measured determination. They read each line of the notice, noting inconsistencies, legal ambiguities, and overreach. Each citation seemed more ludicrous than the last, further fueling the narrative that the HOA enforcement had crossed the line from regulation into petty harassment. They immediately began preparing responses, compiling evidence to show that the fines were not only arbitrary but also selectively applied. The media attention had emboldened the family. They now saw the legal and public relations advantages of carefully documenting these social actions. Every photo, every email, every interaction became a piece of evidence, a testament to the board's obsession over trivial details. Meanwhile, the neighborhood itself was buzzing. Word of the new fines spread quickly, generating renewed interest and speculation. Conversations at the local cafe and online forums shifted from polite commentary to heated debate. Many residents expressed astonishment at the HOA continued insistence on punishing the family for something as trivial as a backyard slide, questioning whether the organization had lost touch with reason. Others, while sympathetic to the Thompsons, voiced concerns about community cohesion and feared that the dispute might escalate further. The Thompsons, aware of these tensions, used them strategically, subtly encouraging neighbors to observe the board's overreach while maintaining their own composure. Karen, in contrast, doubled down on her presence. She began walking the neighborhood more frequently, scrutinizing lawns, counting ornaments, and occasionally stopping to lecture residents about compliance. Her actions, meant to assert authority, increasingly made her appear obsessive, a figure caught between personal pride and institutional duty. The news crew, sensing the unfolding drama, returned for follow-up coverage. Cameras captured Karen pacing behind meticulously trimmed hedges, waving documents in hand, while the Thompsons maintained a quiet resilience, guiding the children on the slide as reporters documented every detail. Interviews highlighted the absurdity of the escalating fines, painting the family as reasonable and the HOA as increasingly draconian. Social media once again erupted with commentary, with hashtags trending and neighboring communities weighing in on the spectacle. The narrative had grown beyond a single cul-de-sac. The story now symbolized the broader struggle between individual rights and micromanaged authority in suburban life. In response, the board called yet another emergency meeting, this one more frantic than the last. Some members advocated caution, warning that further escalation could lead to lawsuits, public ridicule, or both. Others, emboldened by Karen's insistence, urged the immediate enforcement of fines and legal threats. The atmosphere was tense, with disagreements spilling over into sharp exchanges and pointed accusations. Karen, in particular, dominated the discussion, her voice unwavering yet tinged with desperation, insisting that the Thompsons' continued defiance was a direct threat to the integrity of the neighborhood. Meanwhile, the family strategy remained consistent: remain calm, document everything, and continue to leverage media attention. They knew that any rash action on the HOA part could be turned into further public scrutiny, highlighting the board's disproportionate response. Legal advice was sought cautiously, not to provoke confrontation, but to ensure that every HOA notice and fine could be challenged effectively if necessary. Behind the scenes, the neighborhood continued to shift. Residents who had once passively observed the Thompsons' struggle were now vocal, questioning past fines and the selective enforcement of rules. Some cautiously expressed solidarity, while others observed in disbelief, comparing their own encounters with the HOA to the escalating absurdity of the slide saga. The pressure on the board grew, both internally and externally. The combination of public exposure, neighbor scrutiny, and mounting legal implications created an environment in which each decision carried heightened consequences. Karen, while still fervently committed to her interpretation of neighborhood standards, began to show signs of strain. Her once confident demeanor occasionally faltered, particularly when cameras were present or neighbors openly challenged her claims. The juxtaposition of her rigid enforcement and the Thompsons' calm resilience became a recurring motif for the media, amplifying the narrative of reason versus overreach. As the days turned into weeks, tension reached a tipping point. The HOA issued a formal notice threatening legal action if the slide was not removed within a specific time frame, framing the ultimatum as a last resort to restore order. The Thompsons, prepared for this escalation, began coordinating with their legal counsel and media contacts, ensuring that any further action by the board would be publicly documented and, if necessary, challenged in court. The community, now deeply engaged, continued to react. Some residents expressed frustration at the HOA persistence, openly criticizing the board's priorities. Others, previously indifferent, found themselves drawn into the narrative, debating online and in person about fairness, overreach, and the symbolism of a brightly colored slide challenging bureaucratic rigidity. The story's viral nature intensified with each new development. Social media posts highlighting Karen's dramatic gestures, the children's laughter, and the growing list of fines circulated widely, prompting national interest in a dispute that, in any other context, would have seemed trivial. The Thompsons became local celebrities, admired for their courage, patience, and strategic use of media. They understood that the slide had transcended its physical presence, becoming a symbol of resistance, family unity, and the absurdity of excessive regulation. The board, despite its attempts to reassert authority, increasingly found itself reacting defensively rather than proactively. Every new fine, notice, or threat was scrutinized, photographed, and shared, creating a feedback loop of public exposure that highlighted the disconnect between the HOA intentions and the community's perception. By the end of the chapter, it was evident that the conflict had evolved far beyond the original dispute over a yellow slide. The Thompsons had successfully turned a private battle into a public spectacle. using media, community support, and strategic documentation to challenge the HO authority. Karen, while still committed to her crusade, was now operating under the watchful eyes of neighbors, reporters, and social media, her every move scrutinized and amplified. The stage was set for the next escalation, one that would test the limits of both the HOA power and the family's ingenuity as the suburban battlefield continued to shift in unexpected and dramatic ways. Tension reached a fever pitch as the HOA, frustrated by their inability to control the narrative, decided to take direct action on the property itself, escalating the conflict from letters and fines to physical intervention. One crisp morning, a small convoy of board members arrived unannounced, led by Karen, their mission clear: document, intimidate, and, if possible, enforce compliance before any further media exposure could amplify the story. The sight of the group gathering near the Thompson driveway immediately drew attention. Neighbors peeked from windows, some taking out phones to capture the scene, others murmuring in disbelief. The yellow slide, standing innocently in the sunlight, seemed to glow with defiance, a bright beacon that had become the epicenter of the suburban storm. Karen strode forward, clipboard in hand, her face a mask of righteous indignation. The rest of the board followed, some carrying additional paperwork, others holding measuring tapes and inspection tools, their actions designed to project authority but increasingly resembling overzealous theatrics. The Thompsons, aware of the visit, greeted the board with calm but firm composure, understanding that any reaction could either escalate or diffuse the situation. Cameras, previously scheduled for a follow-up news segment, arrived shortly after, capturing the unfolding drama with the precision of a reality show. Karen immediately began inspecting the slide, pointing out perceived infractions, her gestures exaggerated, almost performative. Each complaint was meticulously recorded on camera. The color was too bright, the slope allegedly non-compliant with safety standards, and the proximity to the property line deemed a potential hazard. As Karen cataloged each supposed violation, neighbors gathered, drawn by the spectacle, their faces reflecting a mixture of amusement, disbelief, and curiosity. The children, unfazed by the board's presence, continued to play on the slide, their laughter punctuating the tense air and emphasizing the absurdity of the board's inspection. Reporters asked the Thompsons questions, carefully documenting their responses, highlighting the human dimension of a battle that had begun with an innocent backyard fixture. The parents explained that the slide existed purely for their children's enjoyment, that all safety precautions had been taken, and that the board's focus on aesthetics rather than well-being demonstrated a disturbing misuse of power. Social media feeds began to light up in real time, neighbors posting live updates, images, and commentary, amplifying the story beyond the cul-de-sac. Karen's efforts to assert authority now seemed counterproductive. Each word, gesture, and note taken in the public eye only emphasized the disproportionate nature of the HOAs. Her dramatic insistence that the slide must be removed immediately appeared to viewers as petty and excessive, fueling a narrative of bureaucratic overreach. The board members, sensing the optics were unfavorable, began whispering among themselves, their attempts to coordinate quietly undermined by the persistent presence of cameras and the growing crowd of spectators. One member suggested de-escalation, recognizing that any confrontation might be recorded and shared widely, yet Karen dismissed the cautionary advice, insisting that compliance be enforced to protect the community standards and maintain the board's authority. Tension escalated as Karen attempted to measure the slide more closely, moving uncomfortably near the children. The parents, aware of both safety and perception, intervened tactfully, ensuring their children were safe while remaining calm in front of the cameras. The scene had transformed into a standoff, the board asserting authority, the family exercising restraint and patience, and the children obliviously enjoying their playground, a stark visual representation of reason versus overreach. Reporters captured every detail from the meticulous inspection notes to Karen's exaggerated expressions of concern. The narrative of absurdity versus innocence became more compelling with each passing moment, creating content that viewers found simultaneously shocking and humorous. Social media amplified the spectacle, with posts likening the situation to a theatrical performance, hashtags trending, and users debating the limits of OJ power. Even local commentators joined in, framing the story as a cautionary tale of bureaucracy gone too far. As the confrontation continued, tension among the board members became palpable. Subtle disagreements emerged, some questioning the wisdom of a direct property visit, while others aligned entirely with Karen's uncompromising approach. Their internal discord, unintentionally revealed through side conversations captured on camera, further highlighted the chaos and mismanagement within the HOA. The Thompsons remained strategic, avoiding any action that could be misinterpreted as aggression while ensuring that every interaction was recorded and documented. Their composure and measured responses contrasted sharply with the board's increasingly flustered and performative actions, reinforcing the narrative of reason triumphing over arbitrary authority. Hours passed with no resolution in sight. Karen insisted on additional notes, citing non-existent violations, while the parents patiently addressed each claim, emphasizing reason and fairness. The children continued to play, their joy becoming a symbol of resistance, a living reminder that the HOA rigid standards could not dictate happiness or childhood. Eventually, as the sun dipped lower in the sky, the board began to retreat, their actions unable to achieve the intended effect. The media captured their departure, the neighborhood buzzing with newfound energy and chatter. The story had reached a turning point. The public had witnessed a direct intervention, observed the disparity between authority and reason, and seen the family's resilience firsthand. Reactions poured in from social media, news websites, and local communities. Support for the Thompsons grew exponentially, with many applauding their courage and strategic handling of a high-pressure situation. Memes, articles, and commentaries circulated widely, highlighting Karen's dramatic gestures and the absurdity of enforcing fines for a backyard slide. Even those previously indifferent to HOA conflicts began discussing the story, debating the balance between community rules and personal freedom. Meanwhile, the board found itself in an increasingly precarious position. Their actions intended to assert control had instead amplified public scrutiny. Karen, exhausted and visibly frustrated, continued to insist on the necessity of enforcement, but her credibility had been undermined by the spectacle of the confrontation. The Thompsons, however, capitalized on the momentum. They continued engaging with media outlets, providing documentation, and the absurdity of fines levied against innocent children for something as harmless as a yellow slide. Their strategy reinforced the narrative that the HOA actions were excessive and unreasonable. The neighborhood, now fully aware of the escalating drama, became an active participant in the story. Conversations shifted from casual observations to pointed discussions about fairness, authority, and community values. Neighbors who had once quietly complied with HOA regulations began to question previous fines and enforcement actions, inspired by the Thompsons' courage and the public exposure of Karen's overreach. By nightfall, the day's events had solidified the story's status as a viral sensation. The media coverage, neighborhood chatter, and social media activity created a feedback loop, ensuring that the conflict would continue to attract attention and pressure. The yellow slide, once an innocuous fixture, now symbolized resilience, joy, and the triumph of reason over petty enforcement. The stage was set for further escalation, with both sides aware that the conflict could not be contained within the neighborhood. The HOA reputation was at stake, Karen's authority challenged, and the Thompsons' strategic handling had placed them firmly in the spotlight. As the family reflected on the day's events, a quiet sense of accomplishment mingled with anticipation. They had withstood direct confrontation, maintained composure under pressure, and demonstrated the absurdity of the fines to a wide audience. Yet they knew this was not the end. The board would likely attempt another escalation, perhaps legal, perhaps procedural, in the coming days. The suburban street, once quiet and orderly, now vibrated with tension, anticipation, and the subtle thrill of public scrutiny. And amid it all, the children continued to play on their yellow slide, their laughter a defiant anthem, echoing through a neighborhood suddenly aware that the battle over a simple backyard fixture had become a story far larger than anyone could have imagined. The following days brought a chilling escalation as the HOA, desperate to regain authority and save face after the public spectacle, issued a formal legal threat. The Thompsons received a thick envelope, stamped and marked with legal language that made the situation feel ominous and official. The document outlined potential lawsuits, citations, and penalties if the slide was not removed immediately, framing the family's resistance as both a violation of community rules and a deliberate defiance of HOA authority. Every word carried the weight of institutional intimidation, yet beneath the surface, it was evident that the HOA was overplaying its hand, unaware of how public opinion now worked against them. The parents carefully reviewed the documents, noting legal loopholes, ambiguous language, and inconsistencies in enforcement. Their meticulous preparation reflected not only a desire to protect their family, but also an understanding that this confrontation was now public, meaning any overreach could be exposed and criticized on a wider stage. Meanwhile, news outlets, having covered the initial confrontations and property visit, returned to follow the legal escalation. Cameras captured the family reviewing the documents, the children playing innocently in the background, and Karen lurking nearby with a clipboard, her frustration visible even from a distance. The footage painted a clear contrast: calm reason versus bureaucratic overreach, laughter versus rigid enforcement, and childhood innocence against a backdrop of adult obsession with rules. Social media attention surged further. Hashtags related to the Islide saga proliferated across platforms, garnering thousands of shares, likes, and comments. Support poured in not only from local neighbors but also from distant communities, many recognizing in the Thompsons' struggle a universal story of ordinary people resisting unnecessary authority. Memes mocking the absurdity of finding a family over a backyard slide went viral, and discussion forums lit up with debates over HOA power, personal freedoms, and the right to enjoy one's property without harassment. Karen, increasingly aware that her every move was under scrutiny, attempted to project control, issuing statements and letters defending the board's actions. Her proclamations emphasized community standards, property values, and safety, yet every word seemed only to reinforce the perception that the HOA had lost perspective. The more she insisted, the more absurd the situation appeared to the public. Internally, the HOA board became divided. Some members advocated for legal action, hoping the threat would coerce compliance and restore authority. Others argued for caution, noting that public perception had turned sharply against them and that any misstep could escalate backlash, invite lawsuits, or further ridicule. Their debates, sometimes captured inadvertently by cameras or neighbors, revealed fractures within the organization that were previously invisible. The Thompsons, meanwhile, continued their strategy of measured engagement. Every interaction, email, and phone call was documented, forming a comprehensive record of the HOA actions. They consulted legal counsel cautiously, ensuring that any response or public statement strengthened their position while avoiding provocation. Their approach was strategic, leveraging public visibility, media interest, and neighbor support to maintain leverage against the HOA increasingly desperate maneuvers. As the legal threat circulated, the neighborhood's mood shifted perceptibly. Residents who had previously been passive observers became more vocal. Some openly supported the family, questioning previous fines and enforcement patterns and expressing concern about the board's priorities. Others, while sympathetic to the HOA intent to maintain order, recognized the absurdity of punishing a family for something as innocuous as a yellow slide. Conversations that had once centered on lawn maintenance and property decor now revolved around fairness, authority, and the limits of bureaucratic control. The children, unaffected by legal documents or public scrutiny, continued to play on the slide, their laughter growing louder as if echoing the public sentiment in their favor. Each squeal became a symbolic reminder that joy and innocence could not be governed by arbitrary rules, and that the board's obsession was increasingly futile in the face of reason and public support. The media seized on the legal threat, framing it as a pivotal moment in the unfolding story. Reporters highlighted the contrast between the intimidating language of the HOA and the calm, reasonable response of the family. Coverage emphasized the disproportionate nature of enforcement, the escalating fines, and the absurdity of targeting children's play equipment for bureaucratic scrutiny. Online engagement continued to explode, with public outrage reinforcing the narrative that the HOA was overreaching and that the Thompsons were standing up not just for themselves, but for every family facing arbitrary rules. Karen, increasingly frustrated by the tide of public opinion, attempted to regain authority by issuing further citations and warnings. Each action, however, was met with additional media coverage, neighborhood commentary, and social media amplification, reinforcing the perception that her zeal had become performative and excessive. The board's credibility continued to erode with each passing day. Meanwhile, the Thompsons leveraged their growing public support to encourage peaceful advocacy. Neighbors rallied subtly, offering testimonials, posting updates, and attending informal gatherings to express solidarity. The story became a unifying moment for the community, highlighting the disconnect between the board's rigid enforcement and the residents' desire for fairness and reason. Behind the scenes, tension escalated within the HOA as legal consultations revealed potential vulnerabilities. Lawyers warned that pursuing enforcement aggressively could result in reputational damage, costly litigation, and a public relations disaster. Karen, undeterred, insisted on pursuing her vision of order, but the board increasingly recognized that restraint might be the only viable option to prevent further escalation. As the days turned into weeks, the story continued to dominate local media coverage. Interviews with the Thompsons, footage of the children playing, and commentary on Karen's overzealous tactics kept the public engaged. Social media users debated the balance between community standards and individual freedom, often citing the slide saga as a prime example of bureaucratic absurdity. The family's calm, strategic approach won widespread admiration, portraying them as principled, rational actors standing up to an institution gone rogue. By the end of the week, the stage was set for the next phase. The HOA, having exhausted letters, fines, and media management, faced a decision: escalate further with legal proceedings or retreat in the face of public scrutiny. Karen, determined to defend her personal vision of neighborhood standards, pushed for action, but the growing awareness of public opinion made the board wary of confrontation. The children's laughter, the family's composure, and the community's growing support had transformed the story from a private dispute into a public reckoning, highlighting the absurdity of micromanaged control and the power of visibility, resilience, and strategic patience. The yellow slide, once a simple playground fixture, now stood as a symbol of victory and principle, representing the triumph of reason, joy, and public accountability over arbitrary enforcement. And amid the looming threat of legal escalation, the family prepared for whatever next move the HOA might attempt, knowing that the narrative had shifted irrevocably in their favor, that public attention would remain intense, and that every overreach by the board would only strengthen their case and reputation. The suburban street, once quiet and orderly, now hummed with anticipation, attention, and the subtle thrill of a community witnessing an unlikely battle unfold in real time. The atmosphere on the suburban street had transformed entirely from quiet conformity to a stage of anticipation, as if the neighborhood itself sensed the approaching climax of the ongoing battle. The HOA, exhausted by weeks of public scrutiny, media coverage, and internal discord, finally resolved to escalate in a highly visible and dramatic way. They arranged what they called a formal enforcement visit, bringing not just board members but also lawyers, compliance officers, and a few neutral officials, intending to showcase the full weight of authority against the defiant Thompson. The convoy arrived mid-morning, the cars pulling into driveways with a deliberate sense of ceremony, cameras from previous news crews already poised to capture the encounter. Karen, visibly determined to reclaim the narrative, led the group, clipboard in hand, her expression alternating between righteous indignation and a trace of anxiety. The Thompsons, aware of the impending confrontation, prepared meticulously. Their media contacts had been briefed, legal counsel was on standby, and the children's play area was arranged to highlight both safety and the joy that had become emblematic of their resistance. Neighbors, alerted by the commotion, gathered in clusters, some holding smartphones, others peering cautiously over fences, all acutely aware that history was being made on their street. The scene was surreal, a suburban cul-de-sac transformed into a theater with families, officials, reporters, and spectators all playing defined roles in a narrative that had begun with a simple backyard slide. As the HOA and their legal team approached, the Thompsons' composure contrasted sharply with the board's anxious intensity. Karen immediately began reciting the litany of fines, violations, and purported dangers, her voice carrying across the street, amplified by the presence of media cameras. The lawyers interjected with legal terminology, citing covenants, bylaws, and procedural technicalities as though the very volume of words could compel compliance. Yet in every shot, the children played on the slide, laughing, waving, sliding down with carefree abandon, a living counterpoint to the seriousness of the legalistic display. Reporters recorded the juxtaposition, the stark contrast between bureaucratic rigidity and the innocence of family life. Interviews with the parents emphasized fairness, reason, and the fundamental right to enjoy one's property without fear of arbitrary punishment. The media coverage framed the confrontation as a symbolic struggle between ordinary citizens and overreaching authority, and the neighborhood buzzed with the gravity of the moment. Karen, increasingly flustered by the public exposure and the persistent presence of cameras, attempted to assert control through procedural intimidation. She gestured to the legal documents, pointing to clauses she insisted justified immediate removal of the slide. Yet the phrasing seemed increasingly absurd when juxtaposed with the laughter of children captured on camera. The board members, some hesitant, some eager to assert authority, struggled to maintain cohesion. Their own internal disagreements surfaced in whispered arguments, and side discussions inadvertently caught on camera and later broadcast as evidence of disarray and overreach. The Thompsons, prepared for such theatrics, responded with calm efficiency, answering legal queries, documenting interactions, and ensuring that the scene remained under controlled, positive optics. Every question posed by officials was met with patience and precision, emphasizing that the family's actions were responsible, considerate, and in no way harmful. The spectacle of adults wielding authority over a children's slide, amplified by media coverage, had transformed into a narrative of absurdity that captivated not just the neighborhood, but a wider audience. Social media users followed live updates, commenting, sharing, and amplifying the story, while local blogs and news outlets framed the encounter as a peak moment in suburban drama. Memes and videos of Karen's dramatic gestures juxtaposed with the children's carefree play went viral, reinforcing the narrative that reason and patience were prevailing over petty authoritarianism. As the day progressed, tension escalated. Lawyers read passages from covenants, officials inspected property lines, and Karen documented every detail with an intensity bordering on obsession. The Thompsons responded systematically, highlighting safety compliance, providing evidence of the slide's harmlessness, and reinforcing the family-friendly purpose behind its presence. The media captured the drama with sweeping shots of the neighborhood, close-ups of the slide, and interviews with neighbors expressing bewilderment at the severity of the enforcement. Neighborhood dynamics shifted further during the confrontation. Many residents expressed quiet support, offering documentation, verbal endorsements, and subtle acts of solidarity, while others watched skeptically, weighing their own relationships with the HOA against the unfolding spectacle. It was clear that the public nature of the enforcement visit had catalyzed a reassessment of authority, prompting conversations that would likely continue long after the slide saga concluded. The children remained oblivious to the bureaucratic theater, their laughter and delight providing a continuous visual and auditory reminder that the original purpose of the slide had nothing to do with aesthetics or covenants. Each slide down the ramp became a symbolic act, captured repeatedly on camera, juxtaposed against the formalism of adults arguing over documentation. The news segment later aired that evening highlighted the stark contrast. Children at play versus adults in formal enforcement, highlighting absurdity and reinforcing public perception that the HOA had lost perspective. Karen's insistence on enforcing rules, once unquestioned, now appeared performative and petty to a broad audience. The day reached a pivotal moment when an impromptu debate emerged between the HOA lawyers and the Thompsons' legal counsel. On camera, the exchange highlighted ambiguity in the rules, selective enforcement, and procedural overreach. The family's measured responses, combined with public visibility and meticulous documentation, created a compelling argument that the HOA approach was not only excessive but potentially legally indefensible. The media framed the exchange as a clear demonstration of the balance of power shifting, showing that knowledge, preparation, and composure could outweigh intimidation and bureaucratic zeal. By late afternoon, the HOA and their legal team began to withdraw, the spectacle having failed to achieve the intended intimidation. Karen, visibly frustrated, lingered for a moment, her gestures and expressions now clearly marked by exhaustion and exasperation. The media captured the departure, and neighbors exchanged quiet remarks, some in awe of the family's resilience, others in disbelief at the lengths the board had gone to enforce compliance. Social media buzzed anew, with clips of the confrontation circulating widely. Commentary ranged from humor to outrage, with users debating the absurdity of fines for a backyard slide, the persistence of overreach, and the courage of ordinary citizens confronting institutional authority. The Thompsons, reflecting on the day, understood the significance of the confrontation. Their strategic planning, calm demeanor, and willingness to engage public attention had transformed a private dispute into a visible, viral story. The yellow slide, still gleaming in the sunlight, had become a symbol of resistance, joy, and reason triumphing over petty authority. As evening fell, the neighborhood returned to a semblance of normalcy, yet the events of the day had left a lasting impression. Conversations among residents shifted definitively. Community support for the Thompsons solidified, and the ACA's taken a public blow from which recovery would be difficult. The stage was now set for the final resolution. Karen's authority had been challenged and publicly scrutinized. The family had demonstrated resilience and strategic acumen, and the broader community had witnessed the absurdity of overreach in real time. The narrative of innocence, joy, and principle standing against bureaucracy had reached its peak, setting the conditions for the final chapter where consequences, reputations, and the suburban status quo would ultimately be confronted. The yellow slide, once a simple fixture of childhood play, now represented the culmination of strategy, patience, and the power of public visibility. And as the street quieted for the evening, the Thompsons prepared for the inevitable next steps, aware that the battle for fairness, reason, and community perception had entered its final decisive stage. The weeks of tension, confrontation, and public scrutiny had finally brought the suburban saga to its long-awaited resolution. The HOA, battered by media exposure, social media ridicule, and neighbor criticism, convened an emergency meeting to assess the fallout from their relentless pursuit of the Thompsons' backyard slide. The board members, including Karen, sat in an unusually subdued atmosphere, the weight of public attention pressing heavily upon them. Emails and posts highlighting the absurdity of their actions had circulated far beyond the neighborhood, reaching regional news outlets, online commentators, and even local officials. Every overreach, every dramatic gesture, and every inflated fine had been captured, documented, and disseminated, leaving the board facing both reputational and practical consequences. Karen, once the unchallenged enforcer of rules, appeared visibly deflated. Her usual posturing was tempered by the awareness that her zeal had become a public spectacle, one that drew laughter, criticism, and incredulity rather than fear or compliance. Her attempts to justify fines on the basis of property aesthetics now seemed almost comical in retrospect, particularly given the widespread public support for the Thompsons and the children's innocent enjoyment of the slide. The board's internal dynamics had shifted dramatically. Members who had previously deferred to Karen's authority now questioned her judgment, citing the intense media scrutiny and growing neighborhood dissent. Discussions that once centered on procedural enforcement now revolved around damage control, risk mitigation, and reputational recovery. Legal consultations had highlighted vulnerabilities in the HOA approach, warning that continued insistence on punitive measures could result in formal complaints, lawsuits, or regulatory investigation. Meanwhile, the Thompsons approached the conclusion of the saga with measured triumph. Their strategy of calm persistence, meticulous documentation, and careful engagement with media and neighbors had not only preserved their rights but also reframed the narrative entirely. The yellow slide, once the subject of fines and bureaucratic obsession, had become a symbol of reason, joy, and principled resistance. Interviews with reporters emphasized the fairness of their approach, the innocence of the children, and the disproportionate nature of the fines and enforcement actions. The family story resonated widely, illustrating a universal struggle against arbitrary authority in suburban life. Neighbors, emboldened by the public validation of the Thompsons' position, began openly expressing their perspectives. Conversations at fences, in driveways, and on community social media groups revealed a newfound scrutiny of the HOA actions. Residents shared their own experiences of arbitrary enforcement, questioned previous fines, and debated the balance between communal standards and individual freedom. The neighborhood's collective awareness had shifted, and the Thompsons' actions had catalyzed a broader discussion about fairness, oversight, and the proper limits of HOA authority. Karen's attempts to restore control were now largely ineffective. Her prior insistence on strict compliance, once intimidating, now appeared out of touch and performative. Each move she made was viewed through the lens of public scrutiny, captured in photos, videos, and posts that highlighted the absurdity of micromanaging children's play equipment. The media, eager to cover the conclusion of the saga, returned one final time to document the resolution. Cameras recorded the family enjoying the slide, neighbors offering support, and the HOA representatives retreating from their prior positions. Interviews highlighted the broader implications of the conflict, noting that the story had become emblematic of larger issues within suburban governance and community relations. The legal threats issued by the HOA were quietly withdrawn after council reviewed the risk of escalation and public backlash. Fines previously levied were rescinded, accompanied by a formal notice acknowledging procedural missteps and promising to review internal practices. While the language was carefully crafted to avoid admitting fault outright, the Thompsons recognized the practical victory. Their property, their rights, and their children's enjoyment had been fully preserved. Public attention continued to validate the family's efforts. Social media recaps, news articles, and community commentary reinforced the narrative of resilience and reason prevailing over petty enforcement. Memes depicting Karen's dramatic gestures alongside footage of the children at play continued to circulate, cementing the story's status as a case study in both HOA overreach and the power of strategic public engagement. Neighborhood dynamics shifted in tangible ways. Residents who had been previously intimidated by enforcement began advocating for clearer rules, fairer procedures, and increased transparency within the HOA. The story had not only resolved the immediate conflict, but also fostered a heightened sense of community awareness and empowerment. Children returned to the slide laughing freely, their joy no longer shadowed by bureaucratic intimidation. The simple backyard fixture now represented more than recreation. It symbolized the triumph of reason, the importance of visibility in holding authority accountable, and the enduring value of childhood innocence in the face of adult overreach. For the Thompsons, the resolution was a mixture of relief and reflection. They had navigated weeks of tension, public scrutiny, and legal threats, yet they had emerged victorious, not through confrontation or anger, but through patience, documentation, and strategic use of media and community support. The family story became a reference point for others navigating HOA conflicts, inspiring discussions about personal rights, fairness, and the importance of standing up to arbitrary enforcement. Karen and the HOA board faced a sobering reality. Their authority, previously unquestioned, had been publicly challenged and scrutinized. The excessive pursuit of a trivial matter had backfired, creating reputational damage, internal division, and widespread criticism. The yellow slide, once merely a backyard fixture, had exposed the limitations of overzealous enforcement and highlighted the consequences of losing touch with community values. The neighborhood, meanwhile, settled into a new equilibrium. Residents were more aware of their rights, more engaged with HOA decisions, and more willing to question arbitrary rules. Conversations about property aesthetics continued, but with greater emphasis on fairness, clarity, and reasoned judgment. The saga of the Yellow Slide had transformed the community, leaving a lasting imprint on both culture and governance. As the sun set on the quiet suburban street, the Thompsons watched their children play, the Yellow Slide gleaming softly in the fading light. The laughter, free from fear or threat, filled the air and resonated as a final, unassailable testament to the family's perseverance. The HOA, while still present, had been humble. Karen, once the embodiment of rigid enforcement, now navigated a more cautious role, aware that public scrutiny and community awareness had permanently altered the landscape of authority. The family's victory was complete, not only in preserving their property and rights, but in setting a precedent for neighborly oversight, accountability, and the power of calm, strategic resistance. In retrospect, the saga of the slide represented more than fines, letters, and bureaucratic overreach. It became a story about fairness, courage, and the enduring value of joy in everyday life. The media coverage, neighborhood engagement, and public discourse had transformed an ordinary backyard into a symbol of principled defiance and community awareness. The story concluded not with confrontation, but with affirmation. The Thompsons had successfully defended their family, their home, and their right to enjoy simple pleasures without undue interference. The Yellow Slide, now a celebrated icon in the neighborhood, stood proudly as a reminder that persistence, reason, and strategic visibility could triumph over arbitrary authority. The neighborhood, once divided by rules and bureaucracy, found new common ground, inspired by the family who refused to surrender to petty enforcement. And as the evening light settled over the cul-de-sac, the laughter of children on that bright yellow slide echoed like a victory anthem, marking the end of the saga, the restoration of peace, and the enduring triumph of reason, joy, and community over fear and overreach.